nice guy?
It's gonna be a teary-eyed topic.
Are you a nice guy?
I hope so.
All
He's got
right.
his tissues ready.
I'll say
I better say.
Okay, so I think we're getting started because Laura has this up here. This is being live streamed.
You got one of his topics. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's going through something, so when he
The,
shared his words at
show.
home, my husband, I kind of went,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah, I know.
Oh.
Did you get a hit?
Yeah, probably. New glasses.
Lose a little weight? What the?
Yeah, I lost a lot of weight. I used to be 600 pounds.
Okay, okay, yeah, it's really.
I used to be 6 feet tall,
Did you?
Dan.
and I started,
Good. Yeah.
then I started
Yeah, we're
teaching.
pleasantly surprised.
That'll take it out of you.
Where did he go?
well, he's excited to know
ISU.
because we don't have soda at
Yeah,
our
he's
house
studying
that
art.
often,
Graphic design.
and we don't order pizza,
Uh,
so this
I know,
is
Yeah,
the
his
big-
girlfriend's
he
still
said,
up here
and
though,
it's
so
junk
he's
food.
comes home pretty
I know,
often.
so that's a good thing, so I never could,
Yeah.
when
I
you
mean,
came up drinking the Dr.
Not
Pepper,
for
I was
us,
like,
but for,
well, that's your first Dr. Pepper, do you like it?
oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's slowly staying down there more.
All right, everybody.
He's getting used to it.
It is time to go back to our series on Christian-based faiths. And we talked about the Great Awakening in the 19th century and the huge impact it had on what was then the frontier, which is east of here. But
Dr. Fletcher, could you introduce yourself for the
yes,
for the YouTube audience at home?
I am the Reverend Dr. Actually, I'm not Reverend. I'm Reverend.
You're irreverent.
The irreverent, no, I'm Dr. David B. Fletcher, David Fletcher, and I am an emeritus professor of philosophy from Wheaton College. And now all this knowledge has been waiting to get out of me, so I was able to prevail on George to let me do it here. But actually, this is something I didn't know a lot about, Mormonism, so some of you may know more than I do, so we'll find out.
Can we introduce everybody?
That's my
Okay.
next step. And so, who are you, lady?
Gabby.
You want to just get up here and do it? I'm just kidding. Who are you, my dear?
Gabby Fletcher.
Gabby Fletcher. Yeah. Joyce Fletcher.
I'm Jerry Carey.
I'm Alice Pluto, and I have studied Mormonism extensively,
Well,
so I'm
you're-
dying to hear what you have
You're
to
the
say.
person I need to hear from tonight.
Oh, I'll let you know.
Jan?
Jan Miller,
John Nolan.
I'm Dan Troy.
Marcy Troy, and we went to Salt Lake City and met Mormons.
Wow.
That was kind of interesting.
Very.
I'm Todd Treelevin.
So today, as we alluded, is about Mormonism. And so let me get my.
And while he's doing that, I'm just gonna say that there's lots of opportunities for discussion, but because it's being recorded, if you can speak up, it really helps for people at home to hear.
And we've been at least once to Nauvoo. We've gone on that tour and. But nobody's allowed in the temple there,
Right.
What
Oh,
is?
yeah.
They let
what
people
That's
in
where they
before
left
they
Missouri.
sealed it, so I did have family go through the temple.
Mhm.
Huh.
They rebuilt the temple in Nauvoo a few years ago.
I read Under the Banner of Heaven at Missouri.
Oh, did you?
It's
Yeah,
in
it was a
Illinois.
good show.
Western.
They've got
Yeah.
it on TV. It's like 4 episodes on TV under the banner of
Yeah,
heaven.
I watched that
right
too.
along.
Oh, did you?
The book was very different, I thought.
Oh, really?
Read
Yeah.
the book.
Often, yeah.
The book was really educational.
Huh.
Can you explain a little bit about that book? Say the book title again.
Oh, Under the Banner of Heaven. It's kind of the history of Mormonism in a way, but it kind of deals with the topic of fundamentalism, Mormonism.
It highlights specifically on the Lafferty family and
Yeah.
the series of murders that occurred as the family broke off from mainstream Mormonism and veered further and further into it, like an independent Mormon fundamentalism. And it's by John Krakauer.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
Oh, okay.
and it's nonfiction.
Correct.
Yeah. Did you see the show though?
I need happy, light, cheerful things right now, so
Oh,
I
yeah.
started watching the first episode, and then it had oh, what's his face interrogating folks that I just couldn't, I'm like, oh, I
Hi,
got
Mackenzie and Patty.
But I could see it didn't really mesh with the book, so,
Yeah,
but read the book.
they try to intermingle the history of Mormonism in the show with, it just didn't work to me.
Well, my title is still polygamous. That's basically to be a catchy title, but also because that's probably the first things that come to people's minds if they're not Mormons, at least, when they hear about Mormonism, are the Latter-day Saint Church and the various groups that have broken off from that. And they were polygamous, and they still, I think, they never repudiated that exactly. They don't practice it, but they don't say that they were wrong to do it when they did it. So it's an unusual and kind of interesting religion. So who do we, is there anybody online we need to? Diane
And Laura,
and Laura.
trying to figure out if I can
Minimize that?
or move it.
Well, yeah,
Yeah, see if I can
that
move it a
helps.
little
Yeah,
bit.
that's probably good. So you can still see them.
Good.
So anyway, what do we know about this? And it's been said that it's the least understood major religion in America, and actually in the world. People really have almost no knowledge of it. So I had to do a lot of reading just to be able to do this.
We should have, it sounds like there are people in this room who could have done it without so
Well,
much.
they can help us.
Yes.
So what is it? Where did Mormonism come from? Do their beliefs and practices differ, or are they similar to churches like ours, or Lutherans and Presbyterians, Catholics? Did they really practice polygamy? How did they justify this unusual practice? And why did they stop? And other things too. What do they think God is? Who's Jesus? What happens to us when we die? They've got answers for all those things. Some famous Mormons, Roseanne Barr was a Mormon. She's Jewish, but she was Mormon for a period of her life. Chelsea Handler was raised Mormon. Very funny, very vulgar comedian I happen to like. Eliza Dushku, the actress, you'll see her in a second. Katherine Heigl, Paul Walker, who was that actor who died in a car crash. Christina Aguilera. So there's Roseanne. There's Eliza Dushku. There's Katherine Heigl.
Hi, how are you doing, Bill?
Thanks. Thanks for getting in here safely.
No problem. Happy to have you. Some other famous Mormons, of course, the Osmonds, the Osmond family, Donnie and Marie. People used to tell me I looked like Donnie Osmond when I was young. I don't know if that's true or not.
Really?
Yeah. Julianne Hough, the dancer. Amy Adams, famous redheaded actress. Ryan Gosling, that dreamboat. And of course, Mitt Romney, U.S. Senator from Utah. And so there's, since I can only have a few pictures, I want to be sure I have Julianne Hough.
Is that Mitt Romney right up
That's it.
Where's
Couldn't find one.
Yeah.
There's Ryan Gosling, and there's Amy Adams, and there's
Oh, hi. Hi, Mitt.
the first presidential candidate who was a Mormon, and a large percentage of Americans had said they would never vote for a Mormon. So what is it about Mormonism that sets people off? Because he is about the most square white bread guy you could imagine. Hard to imagine what people would object to.
Is that a different sect? Because he's from Mexico. Their family's from Mexico.
Well,
Mexican born.
As we'll
Are
see,
they different?
Mormonism did, when it was spreading, it spread to Mexico, and
Okay.
it's all part of what they call Deseret. Some Mormon wealth, it's sort of interesting, there's rumors about this. Now, they stopped making financial disclosures back in 1959, and so it's been fairly secretive, but there was a whistleblower involved who showed that the church investment in their firm, Ensign Creek Advisors, is their financial firm, manages a cool 100 billion, which is a pretty good amount of money. St. Mark's doesn't even have that much. So this money comes from tithes, because tithing is mandatory.
It's not exactly mandatory, I would just come short of saying that it's mandatory
Yeah, okay.
for the
good.
regular members, but if you want a temple recommend where you can go inside temples and, perform your ordinances, you must tithe and you have to provide like tax records like that to prove
Wow.
Oh,
that
wow.
you're giving that. So it's just short of mandatory, but they shake you down real hard. Like, we think October is a tough month here. That's nothing. They're gonna come to your house, they're gonna ask for, like tax forms. So
Sure.
it's not exactly mandatory for the regular rank and file folks, but it's,
You want to be in the inner.
Can you imagine
Yes,
how
that's
much money St. Mark's would
Oh,
have
man.
if tithing were mandatory?
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because of the churches we've been to, I think St. Mark's is the most diffident about money. But we're kind of trying to raise some money, so maybe you could get something. Yeah, we're not
Before
shaking
taxes.
people
So before
upside
taxes
down.
are added.
I'm not sure if it's before or after taxes.
Probably before. Yeah.
Probably
It
before,
might be
yeah.
before.
Then it's
And this
deductible.
whistleblower says that the money has not been used for the church's mission, but basically just to grow the endowment. So it'd be like the place I used to work. A big endowment, and all that endowment is for the endowment. So when the Lord returns, Wheaton College wants to say, look at all the money we've got. Anyway, the church also owns land, of course, as every church does, and a number of other assets. And there are a lot of individual Mormons who are very wealthy too. Mitt, for example, there's lots of other ones. The origins go back to Joseph Smith, pictured here in his older days. Now, as I said, the Great Awakening was very strong in Western New York, and Joseph Smith was a farmer, worked on his parents' farm. He lived 1805 to 1844. He was converted in some camp meeting, and then he prayed to God to guide him in choosing a church. And God told him that all churches had turned aside from the gospel. They're all bad. Don't go to any of them. I'm going to help you restore the church to what it was in the apostolic time.
So David, what's
Thought.
Setapod?
Setapod?
In 1820, your second bullet, Smith set a pod.
I have no idea. I do have a cataract, as we mentioned before, and that's why I'm wearing glasses now to get my eyes ready for surgery. And we had a good comment
Yeah,
here.
so when you talk about how he was converted in a meeting, the area of New York State that he lived in at that time was just like, there were just so much comings and goings
Right.
with, different religious groups being formed. I think the Oneidas or something like that. There were other religious groups that came out of that.
Jehovah's Witnesses came out of that.
Jehovah's Witnesses out of that diaspora.
Right.
And it was referred to as the burnt over district.
Right.
And you'll see it time and time
Yeah.
and time again.
Yeah, the
So
burnt
there
over
was a
district.
lot of social pressure to, experience some kind of amazing religious kind of,
Right.
thing. And I'll let you go on.
No, that's good though. I've seen that term
Yeah,
many,
and,
many
and, and
times.
it's helpful for the people who weren't here last week because you gave kind of a background about the Great Awakening. And, and
Sure.
so it's helpful to have that understanding about,
And
kind of-
Western New
What was
York
going
was
on.
famous for having had lots of preachers go through and lots of meetings and so on.
I didn't look that bad at 39.
Yeah.
Well, guys used to look, that way, They got older.
yeah, you're right. He died when he was 39,
Yeah,
so.
that is interesting.
Yeah, I thought he was like 80 in
Is
that
that
picture.
accurate, those dates?
That's
The
what they
death
say.
date?
Yeah, they know when he
Death
died.
date is
If you believe Setapod,
What?
his life was cut short.
I think it might be adopted.
You think he was adopted?
No, I mean, that word seven,
Yes, it's a
Might have
new
been.
word, and
adopted.
since I used it,
That has nothing to do with your cataract, David.
it must be
Well, it's
right.
his eye teeth. Some senses get stronger, some get weaker.
It's an intellectual dyslexia.
Well, since, I mean, I hate to bring this up, since I have a doctorate, if I use the word, it must be right.
Oh, wow.
that-
Of course.
That's as convincing as if it's out on the internet, it must be true.
Just about,
Did he have what, many wives then too?
Not them, no.
No,
No,
because I was
not
just
that.
figuring maybe they killed him.
Or that's why he looked like that at 39.
Yeah, that may be true, yeah.
He had big ears, they must be worn out.
Yeah.
So he had a vision from the angel Moroni, and Moroni gave him these golden plates, which with writing on them, which Smith then translated as the Book of Mormon, and he published it in 1830. And then in the later revelation, God said that the name of this new restored Christian church, again, in the aftermath of the Great Awakening, there were a lot of people saying we need to restore the church to what it used to be, what it was originally meant to be. And he's one of the Adventists did that. He did that. But this restored church would be called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Okay, so one source I've seen, and I've read book after book after book, so I'm not sure which source exactly. But one theory is that the Book of Mormon was basically a spin-off, well, not a spin-off. There was another book in publication at that point that had a remarkably similar, like, situation play out in this book. It had the same, and then the Book of Mormon came out, and it was very, very similar to this other book.
Mm.
So I'm not
Yeah.
pointing fingers, and, like, we can look more critically at the Church of Latter-day Saints because it is a, like, newer religion,
Right.
and, so,
Pretty new.
I don't like to point fingers, but, he'd had a history of, bilking people out of money and things like that, and then all of a sudden, he's coming out with this book, and, you read about, pay the printer's bill, and
Right.
he had the friend writing it down, and he was reciting,
Right.
well, not reciting, I'm sorry, he was wearing the spectacles
Right. Yeah.
and looking at the magic gold plates, but no one had seen the gold plates, and I'm touching on this all very, very quickly.
Yes.
So maybe those gold plates were really that other book.
I believe it was 6 other people claimed at one point or another to have seen it, but
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
sources are a little iffy.
Sketchy. Mhm.
Yeah, it's a little sketchy, so, but
Yeah,
yeah,
that's really good. I'm glad you brought that up.
yeah.
This is kind of, I feel like students in my class give me a report and say, well, wait a minute. I'm just kidding. So Mormons believe that their church is the only true and living church because God bestowed divine authority on Smith. And after the apostles died, the priesthood was lost. There was no one was authorized, according to Mormonism, no one was authorized to do priestly duties for God. And then God gave that to Smith. Yeah, so Smith and his
So
successors.
how did
take
they
the farmer and
explain
work.
the people who called themselves priests and bishops and
They're all
so
just
forth?
baloney. This is the truth right here.
They refer to it as who has the keys to the kingdom. And we see something similar to that, like when we I need more coffee. When we ordain like bishops and priests in our church, it's kind of a similar thing. We have a different verbiage. But for them, they say who has the keys to the kingdom, one priesthood holder, up until the 1970s, it was white men would, allow other white men into this priesthood.
Mm.
So that's, he claims to have been given the keys. And so as various Mormon sects break off throughout the years, they claim, well, Lauren Woolley didn't have the keys, he had the keys, and that person didn't really have the keys, they just, but we've seen a lot of splits within the Episcopalian Church, so we kind of can understand that a little bit.
What's interesting though, is I guess the closest analogy to that in the Episcopal Church is we have apostolic succession, right? That our bishops go back in an unbroken line to the Reformation, and then before that, through the Catholic history, all the way to the apostles. That's the claim. So that's our keys to the kingdom, right? And because our bishops are in fact in apostolic succession, that there's a complete line, just as Roman Catholic bishops are. And so we think, I guess that's the closest thing to keys of the kingdom that we would have. So Smith and his successors are modern prophets, and God reveals things to them. So it's not just the Bible, which we all have, but they also get up-to-date revelations, like all of a sudden black silver that night. So that kind of thing. The churches, however, are not with it. They're out of sync, but they do have a portion of the truth, and they are guided by the light of Christ. So it's not that they just completely write us off, but they've got the main truth. Now, Mormons in the U.S. So a lot of people started joining the Mormon movement at his time. Grew very rapidly. And so the Mormon church moved west because they wanted to create an American Zion. They wanted to have a society where everything would be under the authority of faith. Somewhat like, say, John Calvin did in Switzerland. And so we're going to set up a society here ruled by the church, essentially. And other people weren't that keen on that, and plus the polygamy bugged people. So anyway, so they established themselves in Kirtland, Ohio, and then they began to settle in Missouri, and so they're getting established and setting up businesses and moving people in. And the governor of Missouri felt that there was a lot of tension between the Mormons and other people, and they were disrupting society. And so he issued literally an order of extermination against the Mormons. Kill them or drive them away.
Wow, there were a lot of like armed skirmishes.
Yeah.
You could Google Haun's Mill, where they like trapped people inside a building and were shooting at close range with children in the building. And they had fought back after Haun's Mill and things like that. So when they issued that order of extermination, I mean, they had to go. So people were starting to leave when they crossed the Mississippi River. I believe it was in January. But yeah, that's
good.
where I grew up, where they crossed over
Right.
too. So
Brigham Young was the leader. Smith had died, and he left Nauvoo in 1846 and took him all the way to the Great Salt Lake Valley, where they stayed. And there really weren't a lot of other people around at this point, so they were the main society there. This was way, way out in the frontier at that time.
So Brigham wasn't the only like clear successor
Right.
to lead the church. There was a lot of machinations behind the scenes trying to figure out, was one of the brothers going to get it? Was his wife, I think, wound up taking a group of people back into Missouri. Someone took Strangites, broke off with, I think, Joseph Strang. I read that book this summer. They went up into Wisconsin or Michigan or someplace up on Lake Michigan on an island. So at that point, when things went south in Nauvoo and they realized that they had to leave after Joseph and, I think two of the three other men who were locked up with him in Carthage were killed.
Right.
They realized they had to go. They were, I believe, asked to leave. I heard a podcast like 2 weeks ago. I need to listen to it again. But yeah, so I mean, it wasn't a simple matter of, Brigham going, okay, I'll leave now.
Right.
He really worked behind the scenes. He was sending people off on missions, to try to get him out of the way. And he really, there was a lot going on. There's a lot of.
So anybody who knows anything about human history knows that that's what would happen, right? Of course it's what happened. Right? So when the Buddha died, there was a big fight over who's going to be successor of the Buddha. So it happens everywhere. But in any case, they pioneered a large area, which they thought would be a state, called Deseret, which did go down to Mexico. So that would explain Mitt, right? And so it was, of course, Arizona, which is another area. There are lots of Mormons. So they established these colonies. And Brigham Young incorporated the church as a legal entity under U.S. law. And he governed his followers theocratically. This is not a democracy. And this is what they had wanted. This was a Zion. This was a new Christian society. And he was the political and the religious leader. And he finally publicized that plural marriage was okay because they had tried to keep that secret. They weren't advertising it. Said, no, this is something we do. And they've got to, you explain the theology of that? What's the, it's like you get sealed in a marriage and that marriage is eternal.
Correct. So it's kind of like you can have marriages can be for time, which is just the duration of your life on earth, or you can be married for eternity, which is, unto perpetuity all throughout the next life. So you need to be sealed by the appropriate authority in order to be married for eternity.
Right.
So,
But sometimes on earth when you're married, it feels like an eternity.
Yes, is that right? Is that right, Joyce? Is that how you
Just
feel?
kidding.
Is that good or bad?
It's only been 47 years. It's only been 47 years, Joyce, just hold on.
I couldn't help
What was
myself.
interesting was that when people would try to leave Utah and defect back out of the group, they would mysteriously disappear, or Native Americans would come by and just happen to slaughter them. So these people were almost being held hostage if they were like, okay, we're leaving now.
No, you're not.
No, you're not. You might want to read The 19th Wife for a little bit of information. One gal tried to divorce Brigham Young, and she ran into some problems along the way. And then and just to even talking about when they went out west, like the handcart migrations and just the death and suffering that followed those poor folks, and how they, reenact some of those during the summer to commemorate it. That's a very hard part of their story to read, hearing about folks dying along the way. But Brigham Young was not the sweet, quiet guy. However, he was very good at laying out towns. When you went to Salt Lake City, you could see that everything was beautifully gridded downtown, and the streets were wide enough for the oxen to be able to turn around in the street. So he was a good city planner. I will give him that. So
Beautiful city.
that's him actually.
Right.
So yeah,
So there's some of the migration there you can see.
so sad.
How come they didn't go to Wyoming or some other desolate place, do you know?
Well, this is about the most
That
desolate
was
thing
about
they
as
could
desolate as you
find.
can get
Yeah.
at that time.
So what else happens? In 1857, there were more tensions between Americans and LDS other Americans, largely because of the polygamy and also the theocracy. People didn't want to be led by Brigham Young or one of his successors. And there was the Utah Mormon War, which ensued from 1857 to 1858. It wasn't real long, but resulted in the invasion of Utah by the U.S. Army. And there wasn't a lot of bloodshed in that time, but there was some. After which Young agreed to step down from power and be replaced by a non-Mormon territorial governor. And that was a big adjustment for them, because they really wanted the idea that they'd have a theocracy.
So maybe you're going to get to this, but Joseph Smith called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day
Right.
Saints. Why do we tend to call them Mormons?
Well, and that's actually
I
a
know that-
controversial term.
I know that
Because of the
the book of the Mormon, or the angel Mormon, right?
Moroni.
Moroni.
The book of
Yeah.
Mormon.
Italians.
Yeah,
It's Italian,
That's
yeah.
what stuck.
Hey, I'm a
Because
Moroni.
the title was too long. So,
Yeah, the term Mormon is controversial, but it seems that Mormons are accepting it, but they do prefer to be called Latter-day Saints.
They
huge-
change their preferred title, it feels like every 5 to 10
Yeah.
years though, and I believe Mormon, I want to say that was a character in the Book of Mormon, and I think that's how
No, I saw the Book of Mormon.
oh,
Yeah.
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 That's a
Yeah.
very colorful,
Up
yeah.
until now, that was my main source of information.
Oh, wow. Well, there's
That and Big Love.
And Big Love,
a
right?
huge church, there's a huge
Actually,
Church of Latter-day Saints in Newburgh.
Yeah, there is.
Huge.
Oh, yeah?
And doing business with those people is tremendous, just tremendous. Nicest people in the world. And they would call, they would tell me that they were Mormons.
Mhm.
Call
Yeah,
themselves
they call
Mormons.
themselves.
What kind of business did you do with them?
Cars.
Oh,
So I ran a car dealership. I was a manager of a car dealership. And referrals are,
oh, yeah.
live and die by them. And you sell one, you sell 50.
Mhm.
Mm.
But you're glad they weren't Amish.
It'd have to be a buggy.
Yeah, we got a horse out back, we might.
Sell them cell phones.
So there's, one of the, was part of that Utah woman worked, like a horse got shot.
That makes me sad.
Me too.
Jeez.
Plural marriage, what's this all about? Polygamy was the practice of Mormonism from its founding. And stopped, it was officially ended in 1890. And while it was being practiced, about a third of all Mormon marriages were plural marriages, so it's pretty common. And much of the violent opposition to Mormon settlements was based upon a revulsion at the idea of plural marriage.
Also, you have to remember that one reason why they were interested in expelling them from West Central Illinois is because they formed a huge voting bloc.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Mm.
Nauvoo was at one point the largest city in Illinois.
Oh, yeah.
So,
It's not now.
well, I'm
Never heard of
from
it.
about 40 minutes away and I can confirm, no.
No, no.
But, you know, when Mormons were also, yeah, I mean, it was partially based on plural marriage, like Abraham Lincoln talked about, you know, the scourge of slavery and polygamy.
Right.
But also, they did form a huge block. They had women voting way before anybody else did. But, you know, you would tell the women in your life how they were
How to do
supposed
it.
to vote and
Yeah,
things
yeah,
like
sure.
that. So
Yeah,
it
it
was
works
just
for
an
me.
expansion of man's
Yeah.
power versus,
But that's the same everywhere.
oh, no, I tell my husband how he's supposed to vote.
No,
Just
I
drive
mean-
by my front yard.
But the Irish took over Boston just in sheer numbers.
Yeah.
The Irish took over Boston sheer numbers, but they did not also extend voting rights to women.
No, they didn't.
So this is, yeah, so women in the West voted a lot sooner than a lot of women in more like settled areas did.
But, you know, just to think back to Boston, I mean, the old Boston establishment was very upset by the Irish migration. The
Oh,
Irish
yeah,
were
sure.
considered a scourge.
Right.
And, you know, so sometimes we get it right. No, just kidding.
But to say that they gave voting rights to women
Yeah, exactly.
and then to say that they told the women how to vote,
Right.
that's not really conferring rights to women in my
Correct.
mind.
Correct. They
And
tried
it's-
to vote as a bloc.
It was just like saying, it was like Chicago politics, you know, vote early and often. I mean, in my mind, because if they're not giving rights to women, then to say that we gave voting rights to women is a sham.
Well, I think that,
They were just
as,
trying to get more votes.
yeah, as you,
Exactly.
yeah, right.
They doubled their vote count.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because.
Yeah, and so then they could almost create a theocracy by having that big voting block, right? Is that part of why they did that?
You didn't mention it, David, but at one point, I don't know why I'm like having brain fog this morning. But Joseph Smith did run for president at one point. And so the picture you showed, it's interesting because usually when you see pictures of him, it's usually looking very Napoleon Bonaparte-ish. He started the Legion of Nauvoo. He became interested in masonry, and he extended a lot of those traditions. So when, you know, the Lord revealed, you know, how to do the ordinances in the temple, the ordinances that God told him what to do and how to do it, and the Mason's secret symbols and handshakes and things were apparently extremely similar, shockingly
Ah.
enough. So there was a lot of power there
Yeah.
too. So,
You know,
Can
we're missing a track on this. We've had a lot of contact with Mormons, not through reading, but just physically. We lived in upstate New York for 6 years. That's where it was founded. I think the town was Newark, the little farming community where they started. The Mormons never played nice with others. They were very exclusive, and they were literally run out of there. they settled in Ohio. That didn't work because they didn't play nice.
Right.
So they went to Missouri, and they were growing because inside the exclusiveness, the political exclusiveness was extremely strong, and everyone else was shut out completely. So when they went to Nauvoo, that got even worse because they had, at this time, now the money is growing, and it's really all about revenues, I think. And all of the surrounding areas, this was a very large area, and the Mormons were ruling it like their own territory. And so John Smith was actually hanged, I guess is the right word, in Carthage by a lynch mob.
No, he was shot.
Hmm?
He was shot.
He was shot. I thought they hanged him. Well,
And he
whatever.
fell out a
I know
second-story
that.
window.
I know that they took him out of the courthouse. He had been arrested for. I'm not sure what the charges were. And that becomes very interesting right there because Brigham Young was there in Nauvoo, and there was the John Smith followers. So they were literally after the assassination, however it worked. They were run out of Nauvoo. The temple was destroyed. And the John Smith people went downriver and established a church in Kansas City, I think on the Kansas side of Kansas City. Brigham Young went over, they established a colony in Nebraska. And for the same reasons, exclusiveness, shutting out everybody else, they were run out again and continued to Salt Lake where they were going to be left alone. They could establish their own country. What was very interesting about Nauvoo to me is that there was this big split in the church at that time, the John Smith clan and the Brigham Young followers. After that, I don't know when it happened in the 20th century. There's been great attempts at reconciliation.
That is true.
Yeah, and I loved Nauvoo. We were there many times. We had students from Nauvoo, and we did concerts in Nauvoo, so we did have contact. And there was a fence right down the middle. There was a small area on this side. This was the John Smith Mormons, and then on this side of the fence, the north side, was the Brigham Young Mormons, and they were trying to reconcile and put the church back together, but there were still strong feelings that Brigham Young actually stole the church from its rightful inheritance.
I thought Brigham Young actually was against polygamy at one point.
Yeah,
There was a,
that's an interesting thing. It probably would still be going on, except if they couldn't survive in the United States because it was against the law of the country.
Right.
Yeah, so they had to acquiesce if they were going to remain as a church.
Yeah, Congress specifically outlawed it in the Western territories. And
Right.
Mormons still practice it, and they said this was the First Amendment. This is freedom of religion. The Supreme Court said we can't tell you what to believe, but this practice is not acceptable in 1879. And so
It still goes on. I have a
Oh,
niece
yeah.
that lives in
But it's still
Salt
about,
Lake.
it's still about money because the way they do it is
That 100 billion tells a big story.
they're very successful at that. They may still win.
there's a husband preaching to his wives, and they're listening intently. So this is clearly fictional.
Has no historic value for you at all.
So polygamy caused the U.S. to refuse Utah into the Union, and then in 1890 there was a new manifesto which said we're not doing polygamy anymore. But they didn't stop people from doing it. They just said this is not what we're doing, but people kept doing it. So there's a second manifesto that said that no more plural marriages. This is where the Mormon fundamentalists, as they call themselves, started to break away and say we're still going to practice that. And there's a lot of that still out west. And after this, I mean, despite this long, violent history that Mormons have had with other Americans, Mormonism became more and more acceptable after this time. And I'd say generally it's not thought, it's thought of as, if anything, probably the squarest church in terms of people being squares, right? It was just like, Mitt Romney wasn't exactly a party guy, right? So
we called George Santos an ass.
Yeah, an ass, right? That was strong.
Wow.
Wow, sorry.
But he wasn't wrong.
No,
And yet-
you're wrong.
yet-
Of course not.
Just scratching the surface of that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So these breakaway sects were called fundamentalist Mormons, but in the main LDS church, polygamy is not supposed to be practiced. And that was the story of Big Love, right? That was a breakaway Mormon group. And there's a guy today with his 5 wives.
Yes.
Mhm.
So what do Mormons believe? And here I'm sure people can add. The Book of Mormon, or you might call it the Book of Mormon, a chronicle of early Israelites
Mhm.
who left the Near East and traveled to the Americas in 600 BC. Jesus appeared to Native Americans after his resurrection, and there were many, many believers in America, but eventually that petered out, and all evidence, there's no evidence whatsoever that this was true, but that's because, you know, it was forgotten.
Yeah, they have a whole, in, you know, like one of the big universities out in Utah, they have a college, like a group called FARMS. I don't know what it stands for, but they try to find different, you know, places or Mormon artifacts to prove this. And my understanding is that they have been completely unsuccessful.
Right.
But then there was the documentation that started turning up in like the 80s and things like that. You know, oh, Joseph Smith wrote this letter, and then it turned out to be a huge fraud. There was actually a Netflix series on it that I did watch. But yeah, so they try and.
But I mean, this is something that there is no counterpart to this in any other church, obviously. I mean, nobody else believes this. Historians don't believe it, but this is something that the Book of Mormon teaches. There's Jesus, as you can see there, clearly. I mean, obviously, where'd they get this picture, right? Look with all those Indians there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it must be true. Not really, just kidding. But on the surface, Mormonism looks like standard Christian theology. There's Jesus and God and the Bible and all these things. And it has a superficial resemblance to what you might call Orthodox Christian theology. Orthodox meaning things that are believed everywhere by all Christians, like the creeds, things like that. And it looks like that, but it's very, very different. It's actually only superficially similar to what Christians believe. Everything in the universe consists of matter, first of all, and that's something that Christians don't think. Even God is made of matter. God is a physical being, and actually God was once a man. He is a God. There are other gods, some lower than him, some higher than him. So it's just one of many gods. But he's ours, and so we like him. They call him Heavenly Father, and he's married to the Heavenly Mother. They were once people, but they ascended to godhood, and they have physical bodies, but eternal ones. Jesus Christ was the firstborn spirit child of the Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother. He was later physically conceived when the Father created her in Mary's womb. Literally the only begotten Son of God, because God was the Father and Mary was the Mother. And then Jesus progressed to deity in the spirit world. He wasn't originally deity, he became a deity. He was married to Mary, Martha, and Mary Magdalene. Pardon?
Conveniently.
Yeah.
That's convenient.
Plural.
Yeah.
He was crucified for our sins and was resurrected bodily. That's all, what we would believe, I suppose. And they think that we think that Jesus was not a body when he was resurrected. They think that Christianity is anti-matter, which is not true. But that's what they think. And so we think Jesus couldn't possibly have come back in a body because matter is bad. There Jesus with his wives. Surprisingly blonde, considering.
And they look very like 1980s.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
It was the style back then.
It's surprising to find blonde women in Palestine.
Yeah.
A
Well, Jesus is often blonde.
Yeah.
There,
Here he's pretty Caucasian, but he has dark hair.
right, yeah.
What, is dark hair?
Yeah, the Holy Spirit is part of the Godhead. Now, so there's no Trinity. The Father, Son, Holy Spirit are not one God in three persons, as we would say. They are three beings with a united purpose. And the Holy Spirit is the divine being working in the world. He can only be one place at a time. And the Heavenly Father and Jesus tell him where to go. He does not have a body, though, and that's a bit of an anomaly. The Holy Spirit is not a bodily being, and there's a lot of confusion about that and discussion what that might mean. But that's the story. The ordinances, and I'm not as clear on this probably as some people are, but an ordinance is basically what we would call a sacrament. It's a sacred formal act or ceremony performed by a priest. And some of them are essential to what they call exaltation, we might call salvation. So they are essentially a sacrament, and you have to have them to be saved, as it were. Baptism, confirmation, and ordination to the Melchizedek priesthood for men, the temple endowment, and the marriage sealing. It's a little bit about that before. And there's also baptism of the dead. So you can be baptized on behalf of the dead, because the dead are still around in some other place. Yes.
Now, these are the people who have received their temple ordinances, who are temple workers, who are going in. There's two different levels of priesthood. And I cannot say the names, there's that one that starts with an M, and then there's a second one. There's one that boys go through, kind of like instead of confirmation, they'll do that. And then there's a second one, and I forget which order you do it in, when, like, before you go off and do your mission, correct, yes, thank you. But all of these people are wearing the appropriate temple garments, and you can Google them. It's generally all white. Women have a green apron. Men wear a hat that looks like a baker's hat. Okay, thank you, Bethany. And but this is all being done in the temple. So.
Well, I know Todd's wife Beth, who grew up in Arizona, told me that her friends would like try to get her to convert to Mormonism, and she, would like no, and so they just told her, oh, well, that's okay, we'll just baptize you when you're dead.
What? What?
There was a controversy about this because I think probably with good intentions, they did baptisms for Holocaust victims, and Jewish people weren't fans of that. But I think they thought they were helping them.
So we heard,
Imagine that.
when we were out there, we heard that's why so many people go out there to do their genealogy, right? Because they have records.
They are exceptional record keepers,
Right.
diary keepers. There's diaries that people, can read when they were doing their, handcart migration out to Utah, when people were in Nauvoo, minutes from like the Women's Relief Committee meetings and things like that from, like almost 200 years ago that people still have access to.
Right.
I guess it's amazing. And I've told my dad, like, hey, you should do genealogy if you see any Mormon missionaries come around.
Sister did that, right? She knows how to do that.
Yeah.
All I know is that my older brother is so excited that he found that we're related to a Civil War general on the Confederate side. So I'm not really as excited about that as he is. So there's a baptism, and there's a confirmation, and confirmation is shortly after the baptism.
Well, the baptism, aren't they all surrounded by oxen? It's like in the baptismal area?
One of the temples did have a baptismal font that was surrounded by oxen.
Mm-hmm.
But they've started, so instead of calling people to Zion, where you would consolidate the population all in one area, that changed, and now they've been building temples all over the world. So different temples are going to have different baptismal setups,
Right.
basically. You're not going to do it in your local ward house. You're going to do it like at a temple.
And I believe the Naperville is a ward or a stake, as they call it.
Yeah, so
It's not a temple, is it?
a ward is you are assigned a meeting house, basically based on your geographical location. So here in Glen Ellen, I believe if we were Mormons in town, we would go to Wheaton. And then you're also assigned a time of day when you go to participate in, primary or women's relief or whatever the men do. And but the stake is a larger group.
Okay.
So I don't know what their stake boundaries look like, but it's like parishes and then, like dioceses. That's kind of they're related.
Mormons are members of temples or stakes, and we talked about that. And each is under the administration of a bishop, and then all the adult male members who are fully into it are priests. And in the 1970s, I think they felt a lot of pressure because only white men could be priests, and so black men can now be priests. Of course, women are not priests. No. Every young Mormon man is expected to go on a 2-year mission all around the world. They'll go to France, they'll go to Norway or something. And there are 50,000 missionaries out there. So they're very active in that. And there's some of the boys right there.
Well, don't they also encourage young women to go on missions?
Not that I've read.
Because
It's optional for young ladies.
Okay, because I know, Terry's daughter Dawn
Right. Yeah,
did a
she was
mission.
missionary, that's right.
You can also go on a mission if you're an older married couple, but I think it's more like, you and your husband, kind of travel around and do this, but they take mission work very seriously. The boys have to pay to go on their mission, to pay for room and board and things like that in advance. They all go to Utah for the training thing. You see it in the Book of Mormon, where they're all like practicing ringing doorbells and singing that song. But they'll go and practice, and then they take the best and brightest boys, basically, and those boys will learn, like get a crash course in a foreign language, and then they'll send those boys out overseas. So, like when I was going to grad school in Carbondale, their St. Louis office had some missionaries stashed next door to me, so probably not the best and brightest going to Southern Illinois, but if you're gonna go to France, you're gonna learn French, and they're gonna send their sharpest guys out. One of my friends is currently, I think they're still waiting to see where her son is gonna go for his. He's smart.
In Salt Lake, the Creeders at, what's the name of it? Where the tabernacle is.
Oh, it's like the big headquarters.
Yeah, they call it something.
Yeah.
But the
Alice
Creeders,
just said
Is it
Temple Square.
Temple Square, right.
Probably, it's where the big, huge
Right.
building that was up on the
And-
slide deck at the beginning.
Okay.
The women who are in there, that's their mission. That's where they do some of their mission work. They don't go out on the streets.
Oh, I ran into two in Naperville at the library 2 years ago.
That's right.
They were doing their mission, 2 young women.
They try to keep the women a little more closely locked down than the men. And I know that when COVID hit, they called their missionaries home. And that's when I kind of knew it was a big thing, because these kids have very, very tightly controlled access to be able to contact families. But I know that they have been trying to get more like computer-based missions for boys. Because sometimes these guys, they leave home for 2 years with no contact and they wig out a little bit. So there's like also like, yeah, I mean, but if you've never been away from home, you couldn't talk to mom except for once a week, you would be a little discombobulated too. So, but they're trying to do like some like computer-based mission work and things like that, so.
You're told they can't drive.
They can drive, but it's very limited.
They can ride bikes now.
They can drive, it's limited, it's limited. They did change their outfits up, so the white shirt, black tie combo isn't always what you're gonna see. They're gonna wear a little bit different now, possibly, especially in warmer climates.
They're short sleeve white shirts.
Yeah. In a bow tie.
Yeah. There's 14 million Mormons in the world, 6 million in the US. These are the temple garments, which there's a lot of speculation about. These are a constant reminder of your religious commitment, and they are also thought to provide spiritual protection, and some people think even physical protection. There are many stories about people who were in some kind of accident and they felt that their temple underwear and save them. That goes back through history. Mormons avoid tobacco, alcohol, and hot drinks, which they had always thought meant, well, first coffee and tea, and so they thought, why coffee and tea? It must be the caffeine. And so it became popular among Mormons to avoid caffeinated soda, which right there is a deal killer for me. But, yeah. But now, church leaders have reiterated that the rules only say coffee and tea, and so if you go to Brigham Young University, you get a Diet Coke in the dining hall, or Pepsi probably, actually, whatever.
Seventh-day Adventists. Oh.
Yeah, so it's part of that, the Great Awakening, a lot of the people were converted to churches like the Baptists, for example, which also had a lot of strict regulations. So it's part of the same way of looking at religion as requiring strict practices. No drug use other than whatever your doctor gives you. No gambling. And interestingly enough, there are only 2 states in America that do not allow gambling. One of them is Utah. What's the other one?
Give us a clue. Here.
Strict sexual regulations. Premarital sex is forbidden. You're not even supposed to kiss or make out. No masturbation. Dress must be modest and non-revealing. And pornography is forbidden.
And after you get married, you get 15 wives.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
Yeah.
And something that is more controversial nowadays is that all homosexual relations are sinful and are not tolerated. Strongly anti-gay. And the church has actively campaigned against gay marriage and gay rights. So it's not just for their own people, but they put a lot of money into campaigns in states where gay rights were being considered. And of course, the Supreme Court kind of made that moot because they allowed it. Also, you have to make a confession to your bishop before you can participate in the ordinances, and bishops are not, they will be inquisitive. They're going to ask you a lot of detailed questions.
Now, bishop, it's not like what we think of as like Bishop
Right.
Lee or
Right.
Bishop Clark. These are lay people that are working. They're just volunteers on the weekend. So there's been a lot of situations where people are having like some pretty crazy confessions thrown at them, like, childhood sexual abuse or something like that. And these people might just be like a, paper pusher on the
Right.
weekdays, and they don't know how to deal with it. And so things have not been, elevated as needed and whatnot. But I'm trying to make sure my daughter doesn't run out the door. But, so when they say bishops will be inquisitive, sometimes they will.
Yeah.
And sometimes, so it's, but these are all lay people. They don't understand that there's like mandated reporting involved, and it's concerning.
No,
It's very concerning at times.
Public is invited to go to the tabernacle.
Before they're sealed.
But they're not allowed in the temples. Like you can't go. And only certain Mormons are allowed in the temples.
That's my understanding. Yeah, you have to be sealed. And
Alice, what do you mean before they're sealed?
So what they do is, and I haven't been to a sealing, obviously, but they're gonna basically do some kind of ritual to like bless the building. When they rebuilt the temple in Nauvoo, they allowed people to come through as much as they wanted to and tour. One of my friends lives in Indianapolis and Carmel. They built one there. She and I were trying to get me down there so I could go tour it. I missed it. But so they basically will seal the building. And at that point, only people with temple recommends, the worthiest of Mormons, can go into the building to perform these ordinances. Yeah,
You wouldn't be allowed to.
no,
So not every Mormon can go in,
Correct.
just ones that have.
you also have to, not only do you have to prove you tithe, another step is that you need to talk to your bishop and you have to pass an interview.
Huh.
They wanna, hey, you're not drinking Diet Coke, you're not smoking cigarettes, you're not saying curse words, they wanna really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a pop.
Yeah, they're very restrictive, like, as you say, cursing, Diet Coke, of course, you know.
Guess that cuts me out.
Yeah,
Me too, it's okay.
yeah, I'm kind of on a lot of those things.
What is the structure of the governance of the church? I understood that the governing council was like 12
Right.
elders, or like the 12 apostles. And then how do the bishops and so on and priests relate to that?
So they have priesthood holders, then they have a bishop. A bishop is gonna basically run, you know, their meeting house, like their church. And then after that, I'm not sure how many more steps, but then you have the 70th apostles, and it's like the 70 most senior people in Mormonism. And they are invariably all older white men, invariably. And then it goes down to, I'm not sure if it's 12, but then another level above them is the first presidency,
Right.
where you have the actual, the current head, I can't think of the name, but they have the current head of the church and then two guys underneath him. That's the first presidency. And then when the head person passes away, I don't know if it's always the oldest man succeeds him, but that's why whenever you look to see who heads it up, it's always like old white men in their 80s and
As God
higher.
intended.
Didn't we hear?
Sounds like the United States
Yeah, exactly.
presidents.
Just, we're almost done. Let me just give you a couple quick points.
So, Laura, do you have to go or?
I can stay for a couple quick points.
So family home evening, every family is supposed to have a family night together, reading religious literature and praying and so on. And so it's a nice time. I mean, it's pretty rare in American society for families to all sit together at any one time these days, but they make that a point. But young people do sometimes leave. People born between 65 and 80, 62% of them stayed in the church. So in that generation, they tended, more of them stayed in the church. And it's down now, people born since 1981, 46% of them stay in the church. But they do leave in their mid-20s, not their teens. So they stay in a little bit longer, but if you're leaving, you might stay a little longer, but you're still going to leave. So that, they have this problem. So it's a growing movement with many Christian concepts, but their concepts are very different from what we believe. The Bible is not the sole authority. The church can add to and change doctrine. And there are dialogues between Mormons and some Christian groups, but the differences are pretty stark. But they have conversations going with scholars from different groups. They're known for their conservative lifestyles and respectable behavior, strong emphasis on family life. They are 74% Republican. There are Democrats, believe it or not, in the Mormon Church. But the Mormonism will not allow their representatives to make formal political endorsements, except for legislative endeavors like anti-gay things or anti-gambling. They're very strong on that. And there's some Mormons for Biden over there, so it happens. And that's all I got, my friends.
Their families are very close.
Very close.
Thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and shut off the YouTube now, and I will see you at church.